Welcome to Stronger Voices, the podcast for women stepping into their stronger era. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, menopause, or simply the next powerful chapter of your life, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Ashley Basilio, certified menopause health coach, fitness professional, and lifelong learner. Here we replace confusion with clarity, isolation with community, and overwhelm with simple, sustainable steps forward. In each episode, we can talk honestly about the changes happening in our bodies and lives, explore strategies to help you feel energized and confident, and hear from experts and real women walking this journey beside you. Because this isn't the end of anything, it's the beginning of becoming stronger. Let's dive in. Welcome to Stronger Voices. Today's guest is Brooke Davis, and this is one of those conversations I think a lot of you have needed without realizing it. I came across Brooke's content online, and what stopped my scroll was how directly she was talking about something that most people dance around, and that is the way that perimenopause doesn't just affect your body, but it affects your marriage. The mood shifts, the disconnection, the arguments that seem to come out of nowhere. Brooke connects those dots in a way that's clear, research-backed, and honestly, a little bit of a relief. We got on a Zoom call to chat before this episode, and I knew immediately that she belonged on the show. She thinks about this stuff the way I want my community thinking about it, not with blame or shame, but with curiosity and compassion. So today we're talking about hormones, marriage, and what it actually looks like to navigate midlife as a couple. Whether you're in a partnership right now or not, this conversation is going to be giving you a language for things that you may have been feeling but couldn't quite name. Brooke, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Stronger Voices.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be fun and hopefully enlightening.
I think so too. And I don't have very many podcasts. I've been just doing it for maybe like 4 months, but I don't have any like this one. So I've been looking forward to this ever since I found you and we chatted. So let's start, Brooke, by tell us your story. How did you get here? And was there a moment or an experience or buildup or something that made you say, I need to talk about this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'll just give you a little background about me. So outside of the work that I do on marriage and perimenopause online, I spent the last 20 years working in healthcare administration. I worked for a very large healthcare organization where I live here in Virginia. And much of my work has focused on improving patient experience and patient outcomes. I also lead large initiatives throughout our health system, and I help build more efficient and effective operational systems. So that's a little bit about my professional background. So personally, I am a wife and I am in perimenopause. So that is how I started my platform a little bit over a year and a half ago. My husband and I, we've been married for 27 years and we have 2 young adult children. And we've just really grown up together through a lot of life stages. You know, we've built a home, we've started careers, we're raising children, we're juggling responsibilities. And now we're trying to figure out this midlife chapter together. I've always been deeply interested in psychology, definitely relationships, and then human behavior. Those are like passions of mine. I don't have a degree in those, but I have been so deeply interested in the research. And I started researching hormone health after being diagnosed with PCOS in my late 20s. And at that time, you know, my focus was really on fertility and having babies. And, you know, like many women, you know, I learned everything I could about hormones, but from the perspective of getting pregnant so I could start a family. But what was most interesting about all of that, Ashley, is the education typically stops there. You know, we learn about puberty, we learn about fertility, but there's very little about what happens on the other side of our reproductive years. And I am hearing that from many women now. And it wasn't until about 10-ish years ago that I really started learning about what happens when those same hormones begin to decline and fluctuate in midlife. And when I began connecting that biology to changes in mood, cognition, stress tolerance, and relationships, it really opened up an entire new lens for understanding. And that's what so many couples are experiencing in midlife, but we don't have that understanding. So that's kind of what got me to where we are, because this was something that was happening in my life too. And, for a long time, I kept hearing a very similar story from women, maybe in their 40s up into their 50s. And they say things like, my marriage is feeling harder. We're arguing a lot more. Or I don't feel like myself anymore. I think a lot of us have said that.
Oh,
And,
yeah, absolutely. And our spouse has said it. You're not
absolutely.
yourself anymore. You're arguing a lot more.
Yeah, like you're
Yeah. Yeah.
irritated. Yeah,
Yeah, me too.
yes,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much. And I think a lot of people just automatically assume like these are communication problems or these are just extra things that are caused by stress in our life. And yeah, a lot of that is true that we do have a lot of stressors in our life. But, what I noticed is that, most of these couples that I've been talking to that are sharing these types of stories, they've been relatively stable for years. The relationship, of course, has its ups and downs, just like any relationship. But the time that this shifted was around the time that women enter perimenopause. So I couldn't unsee that, I was like, I'm not unsee this. This has to be something happening in this time of life. So that's kind of how I got there, just by my own personal experience and then also talking to other women. And I'm like, wait a minute, we need to investigate this a little more.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I love that story. And it's really similar to mine and some other women that I've had on the show, in that, we sort of arrive here and we're curious individuals and we want answers and we don't want to be swept to the side. And so we educate ourselves and then we start teaching others.
Yep.
And I love this side of it because, I have given several talks about all the things that happen to us in perimenopause, but 90% of them are physical symptom related, right? And there is such a hormone relationship connection there. So you come from the healthcare administration background, which is really unique.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that shapes how your perspective or how you teach this material to couples?
Absolutely. 100%. I've been exposed to a lot of things in healthcare. I'm not a clinician myself, but however, I work side by side by many clinicians. And one thing I started noticing in some of our clinic spaces is that we were having women, come into clinics and have these symptoms that we're describing, right? And that there's such a disconnect that they were just being told, oh, it's stress. It's just part of aging. These things happen. There's nothing really wrong with your labs, like all these things. And so a lot of times women are just left to thinking that something's wrong with them or they just can't handle it, or that they are just stressed out or they're burnout or whatever it might be. And I'm seeing the trend that a lot of these women leave feeling that way, or they leave with something like an antidepressant or a sleeping pill. And these things are not solving the root problem. They're only masking, the symptoms that they have. And so I also worked in the space of graduate medical education. So that is training for resident physicians. So once students graduate from medical school, they complete residency training. And I was highly involved in the administrative functions of the residency programs at our health system. And I started looking into their curriculum and finding out that their curriculum is really not teaching them about midlife health, especially for women. It's really focused on, cardiology. It's really focused on pulmonology. It's really focused on gastroenterology, all the different, body systems, but not what changes for women, and especially not any hormone education. So that allowed me to actually start doing more research, actually, even in my role, about how we bring this type of education forth to these residents that are in our training programs, so that we have this new wave of physicians that have this understanding and this training, because they're definitely not getting it in medical school. Even though that's changing a little bit, that is something that's not foundational right now.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you see that changing, because, we've heard from the educators and doctors that we follow who were in medical school 20 years ago that they received little to no education about menopause. All of their medical education seemed to be focused really on the reproductive years, or at least 99% of it.
Yep.
Is that going through a big change right now? Do you see it, or is it sort of happening slowly?
It's still happening slowly. I still think that, we're seeing some definite pushback, like what you're talking about, from clinicians that are in perimenopause and menopause now, seeing that they did not even understand what they were going through. And they're physicians, that
Right.
they're practicing clinicians. And so I think that there is a big push, coming from that sector of saying, hey, we really need to change curriculum. We really need to make sure that we have women's health, first and forefront. But it's going to be a grassroots effort. And that is going to be something that's going to have to take a lot of people, like these physicians that are actually going to, these regulatory bodies and saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we demand that we have, education in these medical schools about these types of topics. I just have to be honest with you. I have a niece that's currently training in OBGYN right now. And, 90% of her training is delivering babies, performing C-sections, and providing postpartum care. She has, seen women in a clinic that are there for, midlife care, and things like that, but she's not trained on anything menopause. She's not trained on anything that is really about hormone replacement therapy or, the types of care plans to take care of women, in this time of life. So she's taken it upon herself, to get additional training, like, getting, her license, not licensure, but getting additional training through like the Menopause Society and things like that, so that she can learn. But however, that's not what's taught in her residency training program. They're really taught on, you got to deliver 10,000 babies for you can graduate. I'm just kind of making up a number, but those are the things, that they are, that they're getting the check boxes for, is those types of things. And, the need is growing. How many millions of women are entering the perimenopause years, and menopause years is growing exponentially. So I think that is something that is, really needs some advocacy around it.
Yeah, I'm glad she has you for an aunt.
I know. And I talked to her all about it.
So when we're talking relationships, let's start broad. So what are the most common ways that perimenopause hormones actually show up in a marriage? Like, what are some of the things that couples experience, or is there a typical story that you hear over and over?
Well, I think, when we kind of think about what's actually happening in the body, right? I always go back to that. I think the biggest part that what happens with couples is that we're hopefully getting to a point now that women are starting to get more education about their hormones changing in midlife. It's still very low. I do want to be honest with that. And I think it's just because I've been in this space for quite some time, over 10 plus years, learning about it, that maybe I have some blinders on and thinking that everybody's understanding this, but it is still at a very low level. But hopefully we're getting more information out to women earlier, right, about what's going to change and what they should be looking for, and kind of understanding that. But, when you kind of think about it, the hormones have supported women's brain and nervous systems for decades. They change in ways that are so unpredictable. And if you're not aware, right, how do you know that something's changing that could be hormones, right? You start automatically thinking something's wrong with me, or I'm under a lot of stress, I can't handle situations like I could before, and everything like that. So it kind of comes in slowly, I think, to a relationship. You start feeling, like a little bit more irritated, or you're agitated, or you're exhausted, or your sleep is so terrible that you wake up and you're already worn down for the day. You just don't have as much energy anymore. And, you're trying to still run your home. You're trying to still have your job. You're trying to still keep the household running, all the things that need to happen. And then all of a sudden, your husband says a very innocent comment to you, and you snap. And you're very frustrated. You're very irritated. You're very overwhelmed very easily. And your husband, kind of is like, whoa, like, what's happening? Like, why are you reacting like that? Well, what does that do? It makes you more frustrated and angry.
Sure.
Because of that response. And so then your husband or your spouse starts noticing these changes in you, right? And typically they kind of take that, I think, a little personally. And I think
Okay.
that is
Yeah.
where that disconnect kind of starts happening. So, if you're not recognizing that maybe these changes that are influencing your mood or your emotional stability or how you process your stress is hormone related, you just start thinking that, you're feeling agitated and you're stressed out all the time. And your spouse is like, well, that's not like you. Like, why are some things changing? Why don't, what's going on? And I think that's where it kind of starts. And when we don't understand what's happening within our own body, that's frustrating for us, right? Like, why is this happening? And those conversations typically go south is what I like to say.
Yeah.
And it's just not not an easy dynamic to balance because you yourself may not understand what the changes are. And that happened to me personally. In a personal story, me and my husband were cooking in the kitchen and we were using a new recipe, and I was doing my part, he was doing his part, and he just simply asked me, what happens next after this? And I said, if you can't read that recipe card, I cannot help you. And he was like, oh. And he walked away. He said, I gonna let you calm down on that one. Like that, I don't know what I did so wrong, to ask you this question. And it just made me cry. I just started crying right after that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people like that, that's what's happening. Those are some common things taking place. Your kids leave socks on the floor and you lose your mind over it. You start screaming at everybody in the house. Why you cluttered up everything? Like you just get so agitated. And, that estrogen and progesterone, you just don't realize how much that impacts your overall mental health and well-being.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can relate to that so personally. And so when you're talking to couples and they're there, right? They had the fight about the recipe card and they're just angry and misunderstood. How do you bring them, or how do you suggest they, start conversations to talk about there's something going on here and how are we going to figure this out together? Because I imagine if someone doesn't take that step or try and do it the right way, that the divide can just grow. And I've
Yeah.
also heard a statistic that, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but that there's a significant number of people getting divorced in this middle age group. And I can't believe that doesn't have something to do with the hormone-driven changes that are happening to women in midlife.
It certainly does. I mean, do I have the exact research to prove it? No, but I think we're all smart enough to know that it actually does.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, when they get to midlife, it really, yes, there are hormonal changes going on, but it also leads you to start thinking about your life, right? You're like, okay, I'm at this point in my life. I have maybe X number of years left to live in my life. How do I want to live that life? What are the things that I want to spend doing more of? And what do I want less of? And things like that. So I think there's a couple of things happening, at the same time. And you're both reflecting and you're evaluating, is this really how I wanted to get to this point in my life? What do I want to spend the second half of my life like? And I think, it's called an awakening sometimes. And people get to that place and they're like, you know what? I really need to evaluate some things about my life. And I find that sometimes, people also, their health becomes extremely important in midlife, and they start understanding that what they took for granted, maybe when they were younger, that maybe they can't continue to do, as they move on into the second half of life. So I think you're on to something, definitely. I think that you're right. There is a lot more divorce that is filed in midlife. And a lot of that, I can't remember exact statistics, but this is filed by women.
Yeah, right. That too. Yeah. So let's talk both to the men and women out there who are listening. Okay. So for the woman out there who has a male partner who has no idea what how could you expect, right? a man to know what perimenopause and menopause are all about when
Mhm.
we're saying our women, we don't even know what we're in for, right?
Yeah.
So to the woman who's listening out there today and saying, yeah, I see myself in this, we had that same argument, or he's wondering why I snap all the time, or my emotions are just at the edge, whether that
Mhm.
means happy, sad, mad, whatever, they're just extreme.
Yes.
How would you encourage her when she sees trouble in her relationship playing out from this to approach her male partner?
Yeah, I think kind of like, let's just take one more step back, like, understanding what perimenopause is, it actually, the first place is to start with your understanding of what's happening in your body. Because if we don't have that good foundation of what's taking place, like you said, why we're more overwhelmed, why we're more reactive, why are we unlike ourselves now? If we don't have that foundation, how can we talk about it with our partner, and how can we explain it? I'm not saying we have to be experts in it. We just
Right.
we need to have an understanding of what is taking place. And, it also allows us to be better advocates for ourselves too, once we have that understanding, whether, we need better medical support, we need better support from our partner, whatever it might be, in that situation. So awareness for herself is so important. If you don't have
Good
that,
point.
you kind of don't really have that, that foundation of actually
Right.
being able to have the talks, and how do you get through that. And the kind of the first thing that I talk about, with couples, or just kind of in private, just really providing education to couples, is about slowing down conflict cycles. Because it's very important to try to focus, not to, like, instead of trying to focus on the entire issue in the moment, it's kind of learning how to pause when you're feeling like, like you said, like you're having these high emotions, or you're having these moments where you feel like you're just going to burst. And sometimes they happen. I'm not saying you're going to be able to pause this every time, but learning how to pause and how to regulate your nervous systems together when you're having, maybe a conflict or something like that. And to recognize when that conversation is becoming emotionally flooded is huge. There's so much information out there about, kind of like how couples work through intense in situations and things like that. And this is one of those times of life. And another time of life is typically, during pregnancy and postpartum, these types of conflict cycles come into play. And, talking about that with couples is like, first step is, awareness of what's happening to you. Next step is like, think about when you're in a situation, when your spouse and there's a conflict or something like that occurring, what you're both trying to do is to remain calm, in that situation and what's happening at that time. And then, education is super important for then both people, that although you're learning about it yourself, you have to remember that men aren't going to go through perimenopause. They cannot exactly fully understand, what it is that's happening to you, because they don't have any lived experience with it as well, right?
Right.
And so they have to also be present in getting some education for themselves as well. That's very important for them to be involved in that process to learn. And that could just be even sharing basic, information together. Like maybe he ends up following a male influencer on Instagram that talks about menopause and how to support their partner, how to support their wife going through it. And then that way they can share reels or share information about it, kind of making it more about to talk about it. And then, they need to get to the point where they have these conversations on a regular basis. This is not a short term, time frame. That's what I tell people.
Talk about it and forget it and it's over. It's not
That's
like that.
right. It is
Yeah.
continuation, and it's growing, through this as you go. And so it's kind of also talking about patterns in your relationship that no longer work, patterns that are outdated, things that you need to update in your relationship. How do we stay close during this time? Things like that, because this is clearly a life change. And so those are kind of places I think that are a good place to start, is learning about yourself, when you're sharing with your spouse, and learning how to recognize these conflict cycles that you might continually have, because there's probably patterns of it in your relationship. Learning together, and then continually asking each other questions and how do we stay close? How do we, support each other better? How do we make sure that we're on the same team as we do this?
Right. And so I think, originally when I asked you the question, I was thinking, well, what does the female partner do? What does the male partner do? But I think what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is it's really kind of the same thing, right? No matter which one brings it up first, the first step is to get educated and understand this is a normal, natural process that a woman goes through in midlife. And so if you're a male listening today and you're thinking, geez, this sounds like, my partner's driving me crazy. I don't know who she is anymore, all these kind of things. We want to reassure you that it is normal and natural. It's not a disease, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong with her. That's not just part of this process. And so, starting from there, I love how you mentioned about male influencers or doctors or providers online who provide that perspective on perimenopause. And
Mm-hmm.
you're right. I'm sure they're out there. I don't know of any. Right now, but I'm sure they are out there. And so that's a great thing that you
Mm-hmm.
brought that up. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
And so getting educated about, okay, what is really going on health wise and hormone wise,
Mm-hmm.
and then once that's understood, um, trying to reduce or cut off or lengthen the time between the conflict cycle is what I heard you say, right?
Right. And that's because
Now,
that's typically what shows up is it comes to a conflict of some sort. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. So, what do you do now when you have a partner that says, "Oh, you're crazy," or they're resistant, or they're dismissive? I mean, is there some language that you can offer our listeners to use, or some um, sort of things to try to get that partner a little more curious rather than defensive?
Okay, this one's kind of tough. I do hear women say this occasionally, in comments and things like that. Mike, well, my husband doesn't care what I'm going through, or my husband,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to bother, with whatever it is or might be, and that's unfortunate in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of those situations. And I think that is kind of where you were kind of maybe leaning towards that. A lot of divorce can kind of happen
Yeah.
during this time because if the spouse is not engaged, in whatever is changing or whatever is happening, then it doesn't make you feel like you're important to them, right? Like you've spent, a lot of time and energy for the relationship, but you get to the point in life where you really need them. That's very difficult. There's not an easy answer for that one. It's because it's just according to maybe what's happening in that particular relationship. Those folks that maybe are at that point, they might need to decide if they want to get additional professional help, whether that be a therapist or a counselor, maybe that's couples therapy, those types of things might be what they think their next step might be. But I do want to kind of share with you a little bit about some of the science or kind of around that we're finding is that, research on like relationship dynamics usually shows that partners, spouses often misinterpret stress signals.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone's overwhelmed, let's just say the wife is overwhelmed, their reactions can feel personal, to their spouse when it's actually maybe coming from their nervous system strain, right? And then another pattern is that we see how people respond to stress in their partner. And many men instinctively move into problem solving mode when
Mm-hmm.
their spouse is under stress because they want to fix the issue or maybe they want to explain why something isn't really a big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
when someone is mentally or emotionally overwhelmed, they need understanding and they need safety first, right? Before the
Mm-hmm.
solutions can come, whatever it might be. And spouses often underestimate how much a woman is carrying in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't always realize the strain that she's under. And they often assume that she still has the same capacity that she's always had. So sometimes that becomes an issue in a relationship. Well, you've been doing X for so long. Why can't you keep doing X? Why are you saying it's a problem now? Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I think that's where you kind of come to a space in the relationship if they're not willing to either listen to why these changes are happening or if they don't want to be part of it or if they don't want to show care and love during that time. It's often something a little bit bigger than just the change that she's experiencing in the relationship.
I'm glad you made those points. And I like how you use the term hormone informed marriage. I
Mhm.
really like that. I don't know if you coined it or not, but it's pretty cool. Um, but can you give us any concrete examples of like what does a conversation look like in a hormone informed marriage versus one that isn't?
So pretty much, I think we described the one that isn't. It's usually the one that says, you're just moody. I don't understand why you're irritable all the time. You're a nag. All these things, right? So these are typically the ones that they're describing behavior and holding you hostage to
Behavior.
behavior. You know.
Okay.
And kind of saying that's just you. So I think really a hormone informed marriage kind of steps back and says, let's look at it from a bigger picture. Usually frustration, irritation, that's overwhelm, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
usually comes out as overwhelm. So that's kind of taking a step back and saying, I see that, you're kind of struggling right now. What do you need from me? Can I give you space? Can I help you in the situation? What is it that, how would you best be supported, at this time? Sometimes it is giving space, and a lot of times that gets misinterpreted. So if you don't realize that someone's overstimulated or overwhelmed and they are like requesting space or just say, leave me alone, a lot of people think that's being pushed away. They're being pushed away. Typically, it's a sign from your nervous system, like, hey, I'm dysregulated and I need time to get regulated again. And so I think a hormone informed marriage kind of looks at the situation from a broader lens. It really doesn't hold people hostage to emotions, because emotions are signals, right, of what's going on internally. And I think that is the biggest difference, is it allows people to kind of step back and say, okay, this person might be very frustrated or very irritated right now, but there has to be a reason why. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
because, she's acting out or she's misbehaving or, whatever it is they like to label it. So that's why I think that approach is so much different. And a lot of people don't look at it like that. They really focus in on behavior really quickly and just make a judgment on that particular behavior.
Yeah, that's important to key off of. Yeah, I like how you put that as really really easy to understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like one of the things that, I mean, because of the work that I do, and I'm sure the same in your case, my husband is very menopause informed. He actually edits all these podcasts, so he learns and he's very curious, and he even sends me articles and things like that. And one of the things that has changed in his language to me when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and it's like, well, what do you got going on today? Well, I have this, I have that, I have that. One of the things that's changed in his language is he doesn't jump in and try to fix anything. He says instead to me, where can I be the most supportive for you today?
Yep.
Right? Instead of saying, well, that's not really a big deal, or well, you don't have to get that done today. Oh, well, that's stupid. Why are you even doing that? Like he doesn't jump
Mhm.
into the specifics,
Yes.
but more steps back and says, and I know he's thinking in his mind, okay, like this is complete overwhelm, emotionally, mentally, physically.
Mm-hmm.
So where can I be most supported? And I love that phrase. It
Yeah.
instantly calms me.
Yes.
Um, so I'm wondering what you've seen in your practice of what does showing up in a way that helps look like from a male partner, in addition to the example I gave, I guess. Um,
Yes.
and so, maybe if you have any other examples of that, so that, maybe some of these phrases can be pinned in men's mind or whatever as something to use. I think that one was a good one. And then maybe you can also share with us something that male partners might do with good intention, but will miss the mark completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of this comes down to talking about like the mental load, that women carry. And I think a lot of times that's often overlooked by spouses, just in general and normal ways, women are more conditioned to carry a lot of the mental load of a household, right? We're constantly thinking about, do we need to order more toilet paper? Do we have enough potatoes to cook for dinner tonight? If I leave here at 5:30, does that give me enough time to pick up the kid from soccer practice and then also get over to, this meeting that I have to attend? And we're constantly juggling a schedule in our head. We're constantly, keeping things running in the household. And not that husbands don't do that. It's just that we are constantly thinking about it because we don't want a ball to drop. We don't want something to go awry or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear husbands say, quite frequently, just tell me what to do. And I think that is very frustrating for women because what they want you to do is see the need and do the need and take care of the need and
Mm-hmm.
not be told what to do. I think that happens quite frequently. And I see that a
Great
lot in
point.
midlife.
Yes.
So they would like for spouses to just see the need, do the need, and don't ask me what needs to be done.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. It's
Yeah.
like you're putting the work back on me. Now I have to identify the need and tell you what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And now
Yeah.
I'm even more pissed off.
Yes, exactly. So I think that pattern they think they're being very helpful. And I
Okay,
think,
good.
in their mind, that sounds right? Okay, well, just tell me what to do. I will do it. I will absolutely do it. But essentially, that's not the point we're making. The point we're making is, why don't you be the person that identifies the things, takes care of the things and stuff like that. So I always talk about how do we reduce the things on people's plates,
Mm-hmm.
because overwhelm is going to happen at any given point in life, but especially at midlife, we've got so many forces at play.
Yeah.
We've got careers that are going really strong typically, or we're running these, like I said, these households. We have kids we're still taking care of. We have aging parents,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of pressure. Financial pressure is huge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, how do we look at each of our plates? Let's list everything out on our plates. And then let's see, based on capacity, who can do what. Because essentially there's a big difference on who manages and handles everything, but really who can do it and do it the best. It doesn't have to be me all the time, right? It doesn't have to be you all the time. Like I might be better at these 10 things and you're better at these 10 things. You take those 10, I'll take these 10. Let's split
Mm-hmm.
the load. Sometimes it might not be exactly split. Maybe it's like, you take these 15 things, I'll take these 6 because they take so much more time and effort and brain power,
Right.
and
Right.
things like that. So I think a lot of people just have fallen into these patterns, especially if they've been married for quite some time. They were just kind of they took on these patterns because of what was happening in their life when they were younger, who just started doing it. They just kind of picked up these things and they just kept the burdens of carrying these things and not thinking about like, I'm not really good at this, or like, I'm like, or I could hire this out,
Yes.
things like that. And I think if you lay that out and you kind of split that load, split your plate, whatever you want to call it, and you start listing out and you say, oh, you know what? You're better at this. I'm better at that. I need to take this from you. You need to take this from me. And when you start splitting that out, it makes a huge difference. And, women can kind of also relax a little bit. And especially if, you've got to have the trust in your partner that they'll do that. I'm very fortunate, like you mentioned with your spouse, that, we've done this. We've split our load probably 10 times over the year because things have changed and stuff has
Sure.
happened. And every time I know he says, I've got these 10 and I know he's got those 10 and he's taking care of those 10 and I'm taking care of whatever, I've got on my plate. And it just brings in a sense of calm to me that I don't have to worry about those things too.
That's right. Yeah, it's that sense of calm. That's what I feel when my husband says those words to me
Yes,
about what's the best way
exactly.
to support you today. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I want to change gears a little bit because I don't think it would be appropriate to just miss this topic here, and that is physical intimacy and how
Oh,
it fits in this conversation.
yeah.
And we don't need to dig too deep into it, but it is
Mhm.
something that a lot of women struggle with. I know in my community, and they struggle to talk openly about it. So
Yeah.
do you have any advice for couples who are listening today, women, men, individually, whatever, as is there a way to reframe intimacy during this season so we can take the pressure off a little bit, but still keep connection alive?
hmm And I think that there's a couple of things that are happening here. So, for men, if we were talking about sexual intimacy, for men, it's still very much probably spontaneous at this point in time in life. And I think for us as women, it's not like that anymore. It's really, it takes it's kind of like a building block to get to that point of, that sexual intimacy every time. It's not like we're just throwing off our clothes as soon as we walk in the door,
Right. Yeah.
it's a different type. I had a friend kind of give me a really good analogy. She kind of told me, she's like, to think about warming up your oven that you're going to cook in. Like literally that takes, 20, 30, 40 minutes sometimes to get to the right temperature. And she says, that's women. And she says, now think about men and think about a microwave. That's men. And so like there's a big difference and how we get to that point in life. And so I think that there's that mismatch, right? There's that mismatch already. And, there's a lot of things that are going on typically with us, mentally, emotionally, and then the physical changes too, right? That we're experiencing through perimenopause. Sure. And having these conversations are super important because if your spouse, just still expects, the sexual intimacy to remain the same, then they're going to be disappointed and they're going to think something's wrong with them, or they're going to think something's wrong with you, or they're going to think something's wrong with the relationship, right? I mean, if that, is a change. And then as the woman, if you're not explaining about why you feel different and why it, things are changing for you, maybe it's painful, maybe it doesn't feel the same or whatever it might be, then I think you're going to have this huge gap, come into the relationship. And sexual intimacy is important for the marriage and it's really important for bonding. It's really important for the relationship. And if we're not talking, then that's a problem. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to share about that because they don't want to disappoint their other partner. They don't want to say that they're not interested in sex or what have you anymore. But there's build up to intimacy. And if you don't have the foundation to that, if you're not doing the things throughout the day or the week, then, she's not going to be ready for sex the minute you hop into the bed. And so it's kind of talking about the things that build intimacy. It's touching each other throughout the day. It's, doing the little things that shows that to your partner that they're special to you and that you notice things that are important to them, and it's sending a text message, hey, thinking of you today. It's doing the things that you have to put into the work that creates that emotional intimacy, right? And then that leads more to emotional safety, then that leads to, sexual intimacy ultimately. And what I've learned in midlife is that I've become much more vocal. So I don't know if this is for every woman, but I have just basically flat out said, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. I want to do this. And my husband's like, yes, ma'am. Tell me more. And I find that when I am vocal and say what I like and want, like it made a huge change, right? It like actually made him that much more excited to want to please me. He's like, oh, okay, how about this? How about that? Would we want to do this? And I'm like, sure, or I was like, no, I ain't into that, and it's just things like that all of a sudden it changed how the quality of our sex life was. So I think you just got to get to that point of having these honest conversations. And I think midlife does that. Either you just say, I'm not interested and you don't want to do it no more, then that's going to cause a rift right in there. But if it's really what you want, like you just got to say what you want and how you want it and when you want it. And believe me, most men are like, thank you. Like, this is what I need. I need you to tell me what feels good, when, what is better for you, because they want to provide it. And so I find that in most regards is that when I tell women, speak up, like tell them. And then you have to address the physicality of it. You've got to talk to your provider about things like, is it just because, I'm going through these hormonal changes and I don't feel the mood? Is that the case? Probably so. And then, hey, can I have some vaginal estrogen? Because I am having tissue thinning, I'm having pain, whatever it might be, like knowing that you can ask for these things. It's very appropriate. And having those conversations, because we should thrive. Like we shouldn't, be miserable and feel terrible, So I think that being their own advocate is huge too, especially in the space of being like, I don't want to live like this. Like, there's got to be help.
Yeah, I think what a lot of our conversation today boils down to is communication.
Yeah.
In what you're feeling, in what you want, and saying what you want. And I want to just underscore about talking to your provider, especially about the sexual and the pelvic health issues, because those are normal and natural things that women in midlife, and Brooke and I both have our hands up here, are going through and have been through. And these are conversations that you should have with your trusted healthcare provider. I had a woman recently in my community say to me, my doctor never offered me vaginal estrogen. And while that's a shame, I'm sorry to hear that, I also want to put the responsibility back on the woman to take that question to her provider and say, I've heard about this. Am I a candidate for this? And most likely, most women are candidates for vaginal estrogen.
Yeah.
I believe they should be using it. But ask about those things and educate yourself and get information and then communicate to your provider. If you're going to a traditional GYN, a lot of times we don't have a lot of time in those appointments. So you would be beneficial to bring some questions ahead of time, but there is help for issues with intimacy and relationships. And, I don't know. It's a huge problem. I don't know how much of it is the primary problem with the divorce rate, but I know it's a big problem that a lot of women I talk to have, because it's just one thing that starts with a small crack that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and creates that distance that, is hard to come back from. But
Really
yeah, thank you. I'm glad we touched on that just a little bit today. But so in closing here, so for the woman listening right now who feels like her relationship is strained, she's exhausted, she's disconnected, she's pissed off, she's grieving who she used to be, what do you want to say to her? What do you want to leave her with, Brooke?
So we're all going through this. I like to let people know that they're not alone. And it's so easy to feel alone in this space because I felt that way too, for quite some time. I was told that it was aging, it was stress, it was all in my head. I was told that, these issues you have, like, what are you talking about? And, I had to be my own advocate, just like you said. I had to do research myself, just like you said. I had to ask people questions that were hard, just like you said. Like I had to go out and do the hard things because I didn't want to live like the way that I was feeling. I felt out of control. I felt angry. I felt scared. I felt frustrated. And I was like, there's more to life than this. And now it's so much that I have learned. There absolutely is. And we don't have to suffer like the women that come before us, that didn't have awareness or education. I still feel like we're still at the baby steps of awareness and education, for most women. But I feel like that we're in a better place. And I know it's going to take the medical healthcare side to get more time to get caught up because we have to get providers trained. We have to get this scarcity mindset around HRT. We have to get rid of that. And we have to give more women more information to make more informed decisions. So you're not alone in this and you're not going crazy. You're going through a huge midlife transformation. I like to call it an awakening. And, you're coming to a point in life that you need to focus on you. You need to take care of you and your health. Because most women, we probably are all in a situation, we've taken care of everyone else. We've taken care of pets. We've taken care of people. We've taken care of problems. We've taken care of solving things for our whole life. And most of the time we put ourselves on the back burner. And this is your time to step forward. And this is your time to advocate, for yourself and your relationship. Bring your spouse into these conversations, even if they start out saying, I don't understand hormones. I don't know what that is. Well, let's talk about it because this is something happening to me and I need you with me on this. And that might help you make some decisions too, because if they say, I don't care, I'm not part of it, then that gives you a signal and a sign about your
Yes,
relationship.
the big
But
red one.
that's right. But if they're like, oh, okay, you're going to have to help me understand, that's a green flag, because we have to remember, like I said, they don't have this. They don't
Mhm.
understand what we're going through. They run on a more predictable cycle. They might get low testosterone later in life, but it's not as significant as a change that we experience. We experience
Mhm.
highs and lows and ups and downs. And some days we wake up and we don't know who we are. Our men might lose their testosterone, but it's a slow, steady progression over time. It's not like our hormones, like I said, you might have a high day, a low day, a medium day, a very low day, all those things. It's very different for us. And to know that's okay because we're beautifully made. We just have to learn how to embrace that. We just learn how to work with that and to feel the best that we can. So that is my thing. I just want more women to know that they're just not alone. This is happening to all of us.
What about for the male partner listening? What's the single most thing you want men to walk away from with this conversation?
I think it goes back to being supportive of your partner where they're at in their life. I mean, you got to think about the significant transformations that a woman makes. Puberty, huge. Pregnancy, huge. Menopause, huge. And we have to remember that our, men step through puberty. That's the one they step through. We have two more huge life transformations than they do. And just for them to think about, I love this woman. I want to be supportive of this woman. I want to help this woman. I want to be a part of her life. And if that takes me, you getting awareness and education about hormones and how it changes, I empower men to do that. I mean, I've had men reach out to me and say, I think I know more about menopause and perimenopause than my wife does now.
Mm.
I have taken that time to learn that and to learn how to be supportive and learn how to be a good partner, during this time of life. Because what you find out is when people are willing to do that, they have a much more honest second half of life than they ever did from the time they got married to this point in time. They are like, this is what needs to happen. This is how we need to do it. I mean, they're just very honest. And I think that's where when people get married in the second half of life, they have the best relationships because they've been through what we thought was very hard. And they're at the point where like, this is what I want and this is how I want it. Do you want that? Yes, you do. Great. Well, we're going to work together.
Mm-hmm.
So
I absolutely believe that's true. That's what I feel happening in my life right now too. And I think that's an important message to end on too, is that this isn't the end of anything. This
No.
is an opportunity to get to grow closer in your relationship,
Mm-hmm.
to grow closer to who you are, figure out who you are as a person.
Yeah.
I've heard that the loss of estrogen is actually like the loss of a veil, because estrogen is a protective hormone that sort of allows you or gives you permission to step into your own,
That's right.
and stop apologizing and feeling shame, and
Mm-hmm.
be who you are. And so it's an opportunity to embrace it. And I think I heard, no, it was Dr. Moscone, Dr. Lisa Moscone, who wrote The Menopause Brain. She referred to menopause as meno start.
Yeah, I like that.
And I like that. She substituted the word pause with start, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brooke, this has been so fabulous today. I think, no matter women out there who are single, women who are in a relationship, men who are in a heterosexual relationship with a woman who's going through midlife, like everyone got something from this conversation today. And I want to let our listeners know, where can they find you and dive deeper into your work and what you offer?
Sure. So right now I'm just active on Instagram, and my handle is at Marriage in Perimenopause because that's where it all started.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely. And I've got some resources available for couples, and then I also do have a course. It's called the Hormone Informed Marriage, and it walks exactly through a lot of what we covered today, but in much more detail about how couples can learn together, how they can learn how to thrive together. It does talk about those stages of intimacy, and it just kind of walks through, hey, guess what? You didn't learn about midlife. Well, here's what it is. and here's what you can prepare yourself for. So it's the conversation that none of us got at 40, believe me.
How do our listeners find this course?
It is linked in my bio on my Instagram account.
Okay.
So, yeah. So if they
Okay.
go there, they can definitely find it straight away.
Okay, great. And now what is Thrive with Moxie?
So Thrive with Moxie is just my company name.
Okay.
So yes, and then but I go by Marriage and Perimenopause. So yes.
Okay. All right,
Mhm.
great. Well, don't worry if you didn't have a pen to write any of that down or if you don't have a good memory. If you're going through midlife, you're probably experiencing brain fog just like me.
Me too.
And maybe Brooke. And
I
that's why.
had that today a little bit. You asked me a question. I thought, ooh, what did she just ask me?
I know, right? Yeah. I joked on one podcast I recently recorded that like this was the worst time in my life to start a podcast because I struggle so much for words.
You've done an excellent.
I would have nailed this 20 years ago. It is what it is. It is what it is.
That's
But in any
right.
case, we are going to put all of Brooke's links in the show notes so that you can follow her on Instagram and you can check out her Hormone Informed Midlife Marriage course, which I'm really grateful that you have that. And I really want to encourage our listeners to go and check that out because I think it's a great way to start a conversation, right? So
Mhm.
if you've been feeling the conflict and the divide in your relationship now, and you say, you know, yes, I can go get educated. I can ask him to get educated. How do I start this conversation? The midlife marriage course is actually an excellent opportunity. And I'm sure
Mhm.
why Brooke created it. So even just getting that course and saying, hey, I got something for us. Let's
Yeah.
work through this together.
Yeah.
Whether you're the partner that's going through this midlife transition or whether you're the male partner, go and check that out. So that's great. Thank you for having that for us, Brooke. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I talk about actually both sides of the hormones. So I talk about the female, transition and talk about the male transition as well too, and what impacts both of them. And then the rest of the course is really like midlife stuff. It's not necessarily just about like her hormones versus his hormones. It's definitely not that. It's like, why is it so different in midlife?
Mhm.
Well, yeah, these things are happening, but we also have all these other stressors in our life that are going on as well. It compounds, what's taking place in the relationship. And it just really kind of walks through that. And it just kind of really opens your eyes and lets you see like, wow, okay, I didn't realize that our stress response is at 1,000 when it should be at like 10. I didn't realize that I project my emotions on you because I'm feeling like this, and it just kind of opens your eyes and it just shows you that how much you're actually dealing with changes the relationship dynamics of your marriage, and you can take control of that is what I tell people. Like, this is your opportunity to make significant changes. And there are
Mhm.
some relationships that are maybe a little too far gone, that maybe that won't help. And there's some relationships that are just entering this stage and this will help them tremendously. There's some that's going to be in the middle and they're going to be able to say, oh, sweet Jesus, validation and justification of what we're going through, like they're going to feel that. And so it's like, it's a little bit for everybody, and it's not anything that you have to complete every single thing to get something from. You can start with a module. You can go through that module. You can talk about it. You can think about it. You can go to the next module and learn, So it's really kind of built for, it's very specific around each module of what kind of topic it's going to discuss. And you can learn and build from each one. Has a handbook that goes with it as a guidebook, really. It's not homework, is what I tell people. It's
Yeah.
just a guide to move you through. You're not having to do anything that, about that. It's awareness, education. I mean, who doesn't love a little bit of awareness and education?
Right. And I love how it's used as a companion to help couples talk to one another.
Yes, there's
I
many,
think
many scenarios listed in there that actually kind of gives you a good script to help you get through tough conversations. There's ways that you can ask, certain questions that will hopefully evoke, a stronger conversation, with your spouse about certain things. And then it also does talk about how to discuss those intimacy issues.
perfect. It sounds really comprehensive. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Genuinely, this was a wonderful conversation today with a wonderful human being, Brooke. And I think what you gave our listeners today is something really valuable. It's not just information, but it's also permission. It's permission to say, yeah, this is hard. And what I'm going through is hard, or what my spouse is going through is hard. And it makes sense. But here's how we're going to move through it together. And I like how you framed the idea of perimenopause as a shared transition. In other words, a transition of the relationship, not just only of one partner in the relationship, or and not instead of a personal failing of one partner in the relationship. And I think that's really going to stick with me. I hope it sticks with everyone else too. I thought that was really impactful. So if today's conversation resonated with you, I want you to go find Brooke. We're going to put her links in the show notes. And if you want to keep having conversations like this one, real, honest, practical talk about what it means to be a woman in midlife, I want you to come join us inside Stronger Together, because that's exactly what we do there every day. Brooke, thank you so much for being here. This was one of my favorite podcasts so far, and I'd love to have you back anytime. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. And I've had such a great time, Ashley. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to Stronger Voices. If today's episode supported you, inspired you, or made you feel seen, I would love for you to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more women in their stronger era find this show, and it truly means the world to me. If you're craving more support, accountability, and connection, come join our vibrant community at getfitwithashley.com/stronger. Inside Stronger Together, you'll find daily encouragement, expert coaching, education, challenges, and a sisterhood of women committed to growing stronger in every way. Use code VOICES for $25 off your membership. And don't forget to tell me where you're listening from. I love adding new pins to my world map of stronger listeners. And just a quick reminder, Stronger Voices is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider about your personal health needs. Until next time, remember, you're not in a pause, you're in your power.